I'm up big tonight, I bragged. By closing, I was negative $13,000 and maxed out my credit cards. My name is Dave. I'm an insurance adjuster who used to balance budgets and pay bills on time. Tonight I sit in a quiet house where my wife's coffee mug hasn't moved in 3 weeks. Last month, I had problems that seemed fixable. Overdue rent, my mother's medical bills, a marriage hanging by a thread. I drove to the casino with a simple plan: win enough to get current on everything and prove I could handle our troubles. The first few hours went exactly right. I caught good cards, read people correctly, and texted my friend that I was crushing it. But somewhere between midnight and sunrise, between whiskey and desperation, the mathematics stopped working. I kept doubling down when I should have walked away. The dealer watched me with tired eyes that had seen this story before. I didn't lose everything at once. I lost it in waves. Each crash followed by one more trip to the ATM. When hope becomes the most expensive drug you've ever bought, how much of your life are you willing to bet on the next hand? The February rent notice had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days when I made the decision that would change everything. I kept walking past it, yellow paper, red lettering. Final notice in bold, like maybe if I ignored it long enough, it would solve itself. That it wouldn't. I ate cereal for dinner that Thursday night, standing at the counter because sitting at the table meant looking at the bills I'd spread out earlier. Mortgage payment due in 5 days, $1,847. Connecticut Light and Power, $267, past due. My mother's latest medical bill from Hartford Hospital, $1,200 for the stroke rehabilitation they said Medicare wouldn't cover. And underneath it all, Sarah's goodbye note, still wedged behind the toaster where I'd found it 3 weeks ago. Dave, it said in her careful handwriting, I can't watch you pretend everything's fine when it's not. I'm staying at Lisa's until we figure this out. The joint account has $340 left. Please don't spend it on anything stupid. Too late for that. I pulled out my poker notebook, a small spiral pad where I'd been tracking my wins and losses from the Tuesday night games at Mike's house. The numbers looked good on paper. January 8th, plus $180. January 15th, plus $240. January 22nd, plus $320. February 5th, plus $430. February 12th, plus $510. 6 sessions, up $2,180 total. Not bad for a guy who used to think poker was just luck. Mike always said I had a natural feel for it. You read people like insurance claims, he'd tell me after I'd fold before someone's bluff or call when they were value betting thin. It's all about patterns, right? Maybe he was right. Maybe I did have something. Maybe those Tuesday night wins weren't just variance. Maybe they were skill. Maybe skill could scale up. I called Mike from my living room, pacing between the couch and the window that faced the Hendersons' house next door. Their lights were on. Normal people having normal dinners, not calculating whether they could make rent. Mike, it's Dave. Hey man, you calling about Tuesday? We're still on for 7. Actually, I was thinking about taking a shot at something bigger. You know, real poker. Not just our kitchen table game. Like a casino? Yeah. Mohegan Sun's got cash games running all the time. 1-2, 2-5 no limit. I've been running hot, right? 6 sessions up. Maybe it's time to see if I can play with the big boys. Mike laughed, but not in a mean way. Shit, Dave, you have been crushing us. That laydown last week against Tony's Full House, that was some serious poker. You thinking about going this weekend? Tomorrow night, actually. The words came out before I'd fully decided. But once I said them, they felt right. I need to make something happen, you know? Sarah's at her sister's. Work's been talking about layoffs. My mom's got these bills piling up. I calculated what I need to get current on everything. About $3,000. 3,000. Mike whistled. That's a lot of poker, brother. I know, but I'm not going crazy or anything. Tight aggressive play, just like we've been practicing. Small ball, grind it out. Win a few hundred here and there. Build the stack slowly. I've got about $3,000 in my checking account right now. Rent money. But if I can double it, if you can double it, all your problems go away. Exactly. We talked for another 10 minutes about poker strategy, about bet sizing and position play and reading tells. Mike was encouraging, the way friends are when they want to believe your plan might work. After I hung up, I sat on my couch and looked around the living room Sarah and I had furnished together. The coffee table she'd picked out at IKEA. The bookshelf where we'd arranged our books by height instead of subject because she said it looked cleaner. The empty spot on the mantel where her grandmother's clock used to tick. Everything felt temporary now. Like I was house-sitting my own life. I walked back to the kitchen counter and picked up the rent notice. Final notice. Pay or quit. 48 hours to cure or vacate. Legal action would follow. My laptop was still open on the kitchen table from earlier when I'd been researching debt consolidation loans. Instead, I typed in Mohegan Sun Poker Room and clicked through to their website. Live action games 7 days a week. 1-2 no limit. Minimum buy-in $100. Maximum $300. 2-5 no limit. Minimum buy-in $200. Maximum $800. I could start small. Conservative. Just see how I played against real competition. My finger hovered over the mouse, cursor pointing at the directions link. 90 minutes up I-95. An hour and a half to maybe solve everything at once, or at least buy myself some time to figure out a better plan. The house felt too quiet. Sarah's absence was like a sound I couldn't quite hear. The missing hum of someone else's life happening in the same space as mine. I'd gotten used to her morning routine, the way she'd make coffee and check her email and ask if I wanted her to scramble enough eggs for two. Now I made 1 cup and ate cereal from the box and pretended I preferred the silence. But I didn't prefer it. I preferred having someone to come home to. Someone who believed I could handle things. Someone who didn't look at me with the careful expression Sarah had worn those last few weeks, like she was watching me disappoint her in slow motion. The rent notice crinkled in my hand. Tomorrow was Friday. If I drove up to Mohegan Sun tomorrow night, played for a few hours, won maybe $400 or $500, I could make the mortgage payment on Monday and have enough left over for utilities. Small steps. Responsible steps. I reached for my phone to check the poker room's hours, but stopped. First, I should probably make sure I understood exactly how much I could afford to lose. Not that I was planning to lose, but Sarah always said I should think through the worst-case scenarios. Back when Sarah was still talking to me about money instead of leaving notes behind the toaster, the worst case was losing my entire $3,000, which would mean eviction, definitely. Probably losing the house. Bankruptcy, maybe. But that was already where I was heading anyway, just slower. At least this way, I had a chance. The best case was winning enough to get current, maybe even ahead. Pay the mortgage, catch up on utilities, cover mom's medical bills, have something left over to show Sarah I was getting things under control. Prove that I wasn't the guy who pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. I was the guy who could make everything fine for real. The poker room was open 24 hours. I could drive up after work tomorrow, play until midnight or so, drive home with enough money to save everything that mattered. My laptop screen had gone dark. I touched the trackpad and the Mohegan Sun website flickered back to life, showing photos of their poker room. Green felt tables under warm lighting. Dealers in black vests shuffling cards with professional efficiency. Players studying their whole cards with the kind of focus I recognized from Mike's Tuesday night games, but more intense, more serious. These were people who played for money that mattered. Just like I was about to. I left work early Friday, telling my supervisor Jim Martinez that I had a family emergency to handle. Not technically a lie, my family's financial emergency had been building for months. And tonight, I was going to handle it. The drive to Mohegan Sun took 90 minutes through February traffic on I-95. I'd withdrawn $1,200 in cash from my credit union ATM before leaving town, leaving just over $2,000 in my checking account as backup. The plan was simple. Start conservative, buy into a $1 to $2 game for $300, see how I played against casino competition. If I felt comfortable, maybe move up stakes later. If not, grind out small wins and head home. Responsible gambling, if there was such a thing. My phone rang as I passed the Groton exit. Mom's number on the dashboard display. I almost let it go to voicemail, but she'd been calling more often since her stroke, and I worried every time I missed one. Hey, Mom. David, how are you? You sound tired. Just driving. What's up? I got another bill from the rehabilitation place. The insurance company says they won't cover the full amount. Something about exceeding the benefit maximum. Her voice carried that apologetic tone she'd developed lately. Like her medical needs were an inconvenience she should be handling better. How much? $1,200. But don't worry about it right now. I know you and Sarah are dealing with your own things. $1,200. The exact amount I had in cash sitting in my wallet. The amount I was planning to risk tonight to win enough to cover bills just like this one. Mom, don't worry about it. I'll figure something out. Are you sure? I can call them, try to work out a payment plan. I'll handle it. I promise. You're a good son, David. I don't tell you that enough. The guilt settled in my chest like a weight. I was driving to a casino with money that could pay her medical bills, telling myself I was being responsible by trying to win more. But if I lost, she'd still need that $1,200, and I wouldn't have it. I love you, Mom. I'll call you this weekend, okay? Drive safe. I hung up as the GPS announced Mohegan Sun, 2 miles. The casino complex appeared ahead like a small city rising from the Connecticut woods. Massive parking garages, hotel towers, LED signs advertising shows and restaurants, and, in smaller print, live poker daily. I'd been to Mohegan Sun once before for a company holiday party 3 years ago. Sarah and I had played the slot machines for an hour, lost $60, and called it entertainment. It's like paying for a movie, she'd said, watching $20 bills disappear into a machine themed around Egyptian pharaohs. Expensive, but fun. Tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't paying for entertainment. I was investing in a solution. The poker room was on the main casino floor, separated from the slots and table games by a half wall and different carpet. Quieter than the rest of the casino, but still humming with the energy of money-changing hands. 15 tables, maybe half of them active, with players hunched over cards and chips under focused lighting. The host station had a waiting list board showing open seats. $1 to $2 no limit hold'em, seat open. $2 to $5 no limit hold'em, seat open. Perfect. First time playing here. The poker host was a guy about my age, wearing a casino-branded polo shirt and the kind of friendly but professional smile that probably came from dealing with gamblers all day. Yeah, I'd like to get on the 1-2 list. Great. Cash. Or card for the buy-in. Cash. I pulled $300 bills from my wallet, trying to look casual about it. Like carrying this much cash was normal for me. Table 6, seat 4. Good luck. Seat 4 put me between an older guy in a Red Sox cap who was methodically stacking and unstacking his chips, and a college-aged kid who kept checking his phone between hands. Across from me sat 2 middle-aged women who looked like they'd been playing together for years, and a businessman in a rumpled suit who had the biggest chip stack at the table. The dealer was a woman in her 50s with efficient hands and alert eyes. Her name tag read Linda. She dealt the cards with the kind of smooth, practiced motion that made Mike's shuffling at our Tuesday games look amateur. "Welcome to the table," she said, sliding my starting chips toward seat 4. "Blinds are 1 and 2, 100 to 300 buy-in. Good luck." The first few hands, I folded and observed. The older guy played tight, only entering pots with premium hands. The college kid was loose-aggressive, raising frequently, but folding to resistance. The businessman seemed solid but predictable. He bet his good hands and checked his marginal once. This wasn't much different from Mike's Tuesday night game, except the chips were real money and the players were more focused. Less talking, more thinking. But the fundamentals were the same. Position, aggression, hand reading. Things I'd been practicing for months. My first real hand came 20 minutes in. Pocket kings in middle position. The college kid raised to $12 from early position. I re-raised to $36, following the 3 times rule Mike had taught me. Everyone else folded back to the kid, who called. The flop came 10-7-2, rainbow. About as safe as I could hope for with kings. The kid checked. I bet $50, and he folded without much consideration. Small pot, but a win. I stacked the chips carefully, the way I'd seen the serious players do it. Neat towers by denomination. Professional, Linda dealt the next hand with the same steady rhythm. Her eyes swept the table constantly, noting betting patterns, watching for tells, keeping the game moving. When the cocktail waitress came by, I ordered a whiskey sour, not because I needed it, but because it felt like what a real poker player would order at by 10 o'clock. I'd won another small pot with top pair and lost a medium one when my ace-king missed the flop entirely. Net result, up about $40. Not the dramatic win I'd fantasized about, but steady progress. The kind of grinding profit Mike always talked about. "How's everyone doing tonight?" Linda asked during a brief pause while the businessman counted out a call. Dealer small talk, probably required by the casino. "Can't complain," said the older guy in the Red Sox cap. "Up a little, down a little. Living the dream." The businessman laughed. "Dream or nightmare, depending on the night." I nodded along, feeling like part of something. A community of people who understood that poker wasn't gambling. It was skill. It was patience and discipline and mathematical thinking. It was a way to turn time and attention into money. Assuming you had the discipline to play correctly, that my phone buzzed with a text from Mike. How's it going? Crushing the casino yet? I snapped a photo of my chip stack and sent it back with the message, up 80 so far. These guys aren't much better than our Tuesday game. Mike replied immediately. Told you. You've got the skills to pay the bills. Skills to pay the bills. I like that. It made this feel less like gambling and more like using a talent I'd developed. Like a freelance job that happened to involve cards. The whiskey arrived as I picked up my next hand. Ace-queen suited. The college kid had been quiet for the last few orbits, probably stuck and trying to play his way back to even. When he raised to $15 from the button, I decided to 3-bet him again. Show strength. Take control of the pot. Make it 45, I said, sliding the chips forward with what I hoped looked like confidence. He studied me for almost a minute before folding. Another small win, but it felt significant. I was reading the table correctly, applying pressure at the right times, building my stack through solid play rather than luck. This was working. This was actually working. Linda dealt the cards for the next hand, and I checked my phone to see what time it was. 10:15 p.m. I'd been playing for less than 2 hours and was already up over $100. At this rate, I could play until midnight and head home with $300 or $400 in profit. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to make the mortgage payment and buy some time. Maybe even enough to call Sarah with good news for once. The businessman across from me was getting ready to leave, stacking his chips into neat columns for the cage. He'd been up and down all night, but was leaving with more than he'd started with. Smart play. Know when to quit. But I wasn't ready to quit. Not when everything was going so well. Not when I was finally seeing what poker could do for me when I played it seriously. With real money and real stakes. The seat to my left opened up as the college kid left. Stuck maybe $200 based on how he'd been playing. A new player sat down, older guy, maybe 60, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he wasn't here for entertainment. Linda shuffled the deck for the next hand, her movements precise and automatic. I noticed she wore a simple gold wedding ring and a watch that looked like it had been a gift from someone who knew her well. Even dealers had lives outside this room, people they went home to, bills they were trying to pay. The difference was, she got paid whether she won or lost. I had to win to make this night worthwhile, but so far, winning was exactly what I was doing. By midnight. My $300 buy-in had grown to nearly $600. And I was feeling like I'd discovered something about myself I'd never fully understood before. I wasn't just lucky tonight. I was reading the table correctly, making the right moves at the right times, extracting maximum value from my strong hands, and minimizing losses on my weaker ones. The businessman had left around 11, replaced by another solid player who'd bought in for the full 300. The college kid's seat had been taken by a retiree who played even tighter than the Red Sox cap guy, only entering pots with premium hands. The two middle-aged women continued their steady, conservative play, chatting quietly about their grandchildren between hands, and I was beating all of them. Another whiskey sour. The cocktail waitress had been making regular rounds, and I'd been tipping her $5 each time. Good karma. Plus, it made me feel like the kind of player who could afford to be generous. Please. I slid her another $5 and arranged my chips while Linda dealt the next hand. 6 neat stacks of 20 chips each, plus some smaller denominations. Almost $600. Double my buy-in in 4 hours. Mike would be impressed. Sarah would be impressed. Hell, I was impressed with myself. My phone had been buzzing occasionally with texts from Mike asking for updates, but I'd been too focused on the game to respond. Now, during a brief lull while the tight retiree counted out a call, I snapped another photo of my chip stack and sent it to Mike with the message. Up almost 300. This is going to work. He replied immediately. Holy shit. You're crushing it. What's different about casino play? I thought about it while Linda waited for the retiree to make his decision. What was different? The stakes were higher, sure, but the fundamentals were the same. Position, aggression, hand selection. The main difference was that these players seemed more predictable than our Tuesday night group. More mechanical, less creative with their bluffs. Same game, just bigger pots. I texted back. These guys play by the book. The retiree finally called, and Linda dealt the turn card. I had top pair with a decent kicker and bet half the pot when it checked to me. The retiree folded without much consideration. Easy money. This was the kind of grinding profit Mike always talked about, but amplified. Instead of winning $20 or $30 over the course of an evening, I was winning $20 or $30 per pot. Same skills, same decisions, just scaled up to stakes that could actually make a difference in my life. By 12:30. I'd won another decent pot with 2 pair and was sitting behind almost $700. The table had gotten quieter as the night wore on. Less small talk, more focus on the cards. Several players had left to be replaced by others, but the overall skill level seemed about the same. Solid, predictable players who weren't making many mistakes but weren't being particularly creative either. I was starting to understand why the poker books talked about table selection. Find the right game with the right opponents. And poker became less about luck and more about patience. Wait for good spots, bet appropriately when you had them, fold when you didn't. Simple concepts that added up to steady profit over time. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. First one I'd gotten from her in 3 days. Dave, my lawyer says we need to talk about the house. Can you call me tomorrow? I stared at the message for a long moment, my good mood flickering. Sarah's lawyer. That sounded serious. That sounded like divorce proceedings moving forward whether I was ready or not. But maybe this poker win would change her perspective. Maybe if I could show her that I was taking concrete steps to fix our financial problems, she'd be willing to pump the brakes on the legal stuff. Give us time to work things out. $700 wasn't enough to solve everything, but it was a solid start. It was proof that I could generate income when we needed it, that I wasn't just passively hoping our problems would resolve themselves. Linda's taking a break, announced the floor supervisor, a guy in his 30s wearing the same casino polo as the host. We'll have a new dealer in just a minute. Linda gathered the cards and stood up, stretching her back slightly. She'd been dealing for hours with the same professional efficiency, never making a mistake that I'd noticed, keeping the game moving at a steady pace. As she walked away, I noticed her glance back at our table. Not at anyone in particular, just a general assessment of the situation, probably wondering how much longer the game would continue. Several players had started stacking their chips in preparation to leave, and it was getting late enough that the action might slow down significantly, but I wasn't ready to leave. Not when I was running this well, not when I was finally experiencing what it felt like to be consistently ahead in a real poker game with real stakes. The new dealer was younger, maybe late 20s, with quick hands and a more energetic dealing style than Linda's measured approach. He introduced himself as Kevin and started shuffling with the kind of flashy moves that suggested he might have learned to deal at a fancier casino. How's everyone doing tonight? Kevin asked as he distributed the cards for his first hand. Living the dream, said the Red Sox cap guy, using the same phrase he'd used with Linda hours earlier. Apparently his standard response that I checked my whole cards. Ace-King offsuit. Strong starting hand, especially at a table that had been playing relatively tight. When the action came to me, I raised to $15, expecting to take down the blinds or get called by one player with a weaker hand. Instead, the tight retiree re-raised to $50 from the button. This was unusual. He'd been playing extremely conservatively all night, only showing down premium hands. For him to 3-bet meant he probably had pocket aces, pocket kings, or ace-king suited. Possibly queens, but probably something stronger. The correct play was probably to fold and wait for a better spot. Ace-king was a strong hand, but it was still just ace-high until it improved on the flop. Against a tight player's 3-bet range, I was likely behind, but I'd been running so well tonight. My reads had been accurate, my timing had been good, and I'd been winning pots consistently. Maybe it was time to take a bigger swing, especially if I could outplay him after the flop. Make it 120, I said, 4-betting to a size that would put significant pressure on his 3-bet. The retiree studied me for almost 2 minutes. This was the longest I'd seen him think about any decision all night. Finally, he shrugged and called, creating a pot of almost $250 before the flop. Kevin dealt the flop, Queen Jack 10, with 2 hearts that I'd flopped a straight. Broadway. The nuts, the retiree checked, probably cautious about the coordinated board. I had the best possible hand, but I needed to extract maximum value without scaring him away from the pot. Bet 75, I said, about a third of the pot. A size that might look like a continuation bet with a hand like ace-king or pocket aces. The retiree called without much hesitation. Kevin dealt the turn, 9 of clubs. Still the nuts for me. though now a Jack-10 straight was possible if someone had Jack-10. But the retiree's pre-flop 3-bet range didn't include Jack-10, so I was still confident I had the best hand that he checked again. I had about $400 left in my stack, and the pot was almost 400. If I bet big enough, I might be able to get his entire stack in the middle with the best possible hand. Bet 150, I said, sliding the chips forward. The retiree went into the tank again, staring at the board, looking back at his cards, studying my betting pattern. Finally, he announced, all in, and pushed his remaining chips forward and my heart rate spiked. He was moving all in on the turn with what looked like another $150 or so. Either he'd made two pair or a set, or he was making a desperate bluff with a hand like ace-king or pocket aces that couldn't fold to my aggression. But I had the nuts. The best possible hand. There was literally no hand he could have that would beat me. Call, I said immediately that we flipped our cards. His ace-ace. Pocket aces, exactly what I'd suspected from his pre-flop 3-bet. My ace-king for the Broadway straight. Kevin dealt the river card before I fully processed what had happened. King of hearts. The retiree's aces had held up against my straight draw. Wait, that wasn't right. I looked at the board again. Queen Jack 10 9 king. My ace and king made ace high. Just ace high. I'd misread the board. Completely, fundamentally misread it. I thought I'd flopped a straight with ace king on queen jack 10, but that wasn't how straights worked. You needed ace 2 3 4 5 or 10 jack queen king ace, or some other 5-card sequence. Queen jack 10 with ace king was just ace high until the river, and by then the retiree's pocket aces had me. Dominated that I'd just lost almost $400. More than my original buy-in on a hand where I'd completely misunderstood what cards I was holding. Retiree stacked his chips quietly, probably up several $100s for the night, thanks to my catastrophic misread. Kevin dealt the cards for the next hand as if nothing unusual had happened. The other players glanced at my suddenly diminished chip stack but didn't comment that I had about $200 left. Enough for maybe another hour of play if I was careful, or enough to cut my losses and head home, having learned an expensive lesson about staying focused when the stakes mattered. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. Please call me tomorrow. We need to figure out next steps. Next steps. Right. I'd come here tonight to win money that would give us options, that would prove I could handle our financial problems. Instead, I'd just blown $400 on a hand I'd completely misplayed due to a basic misunderstanding of poker rules. Kevin was waiting for my action on the new hand. I looked at my cards, 7-2 offsuit. Trash. Easy fold. But as I mucked the cards, I couldn't stop thinking about the $400 I'd just lost. Money that could have paid most of the mortgage. Money that could have covered my mother's medical bills. Money that had been sitting right there in front of me just 5 minutes ago. The whiskey sour arrived, and I took a long sip, trying to process what had just happened. I'd been so confident, so sure of myself, so certain that I was reading the situation correctly. And I'd been completely wrong about the most basic element of the hand. What cards I was actually holding. Mike would ask me about this tomorrow. Sarah would ask about our conversation. My mother would ask about her medical bills that I had $200 left and the rest of the night to figure out what to tell them. The new player in seat 7 changed everything. He sat down at 12:45 a.m. with $800 bills, buying in for the table maximum while I was still processing my $400 loss. Tom, he told the dealer when Kevin asked for his name. Mid-40s, business suit slightly wrinkled like he'd come straight from a late meeting or dinner. Tom immediately started raising aggressively, not wildly, but with the kind of controlled pressure that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. Third hand in, he raised to $20 from middle position. I looked down at 9-9 in the small blind and decided to call, hoping to flop a set. The flop came 9-6-3 with 2 clubs. I'd flopped middle set, a strong hand, but not the nuts with that flush draw on board. Tom continuation bet $40 into the $80 pot. Standard move, but I needed to find out where I stood. Make it 120, I said, raising to build the pot and define his hand range. Tom studied me for 30 seconds, then called. The pot was now over $300, and I had about 80 left in my stack. The turn was the 2 of hearts, bringing no flush but completing any possible straight draws. When I moved all in for my remaining 80, Tom called immediately and flipped over 10-10 for a higher set. The river was meaningless. Tom's set of 10s held, and just like that, My remaining stack was gone. I sat there staring at the empty felt in front of my seat, trying to process how quickly things had deteriorated. 4 hours ago, I'd walked in with $300 and a solid plan. An hour ago, I'd been up almost 400. Now I was stuck my entire buy-in plus the 400 I'd lost to the retirees Aces $700 gone. More than a third of what I had in my checking account. Tom stacked his chips efficiently while Kevin dealt the next hand. The other players glanced at me with the mixture of sympathy and relief that poker players show when someone else takes a bad beat. Sorry for your loss. Glad it wasn't me. Tough night, said the guy in the Red Sox cap. That's poker, right? That's poker. The universal explanation for when skill meets variance and variance wins. But this hadn't been variance. The pocket ace's hand was a fundamental misread on my part. And the set-over-set situation was just the kind of cooler that happened when you played marginal stacks against aggressive opponents. That I stood up from the table and walked toward the casino ATM, my legs feeling slightly unsteady. Not from the whiskey. I'd only had 2 drinks over 4 hours. But from the adrenaline crash of losing money I couldn't afford to lose. The ATM glowed blue in the casino's dim lighting. Visa, MasterCard, Discover. All the ways to turn future problems into present solutions. My Visa had about $1,500 in available credit. Enough to get back in the game and try to win back what I'd lost. Enough to prove that tonight's losses were just a temporary setback, not a fundamental flaw in my approach. That I slid the card into the machine and requested $500. The maximum daily cash advance limit. The machine hummed and dispensed 10 $50 bills. The $500 from my Visa felt different in my hands than my original buy-in money had. Heavier somehow, like it carried the weight of the interest rates and fees that would start accumulating immediately. But it also felt like possibility. A chance to get back to even and salvage a night that had gone sideways fast. That I returned to table 6 and bought back in, stacking the fresh bills into neat piles while Kevin shuffled for the next hand. Tom glanced at my new stack with the kind of neutral expression that suggested he'd seen plenty of players reload after taking beats. "Welcome back," he said, not unkindly. The dynamics had shifted during my brief absence. The Red Sox cap guy had left, replaced by a younger player who'd bought in for $600 and was playing aggressively. Tom continued his controlled aggression, raising frequently, but folding to resistance when his hand didn't connect with favorable boards. That I tried to settle back into a patient, disciplined approach. Wait for good spots, extract value when I had it, fold when I didn't. Basic poker strategy that had worked earlier in the session, before I'd gotten careless with that ace-king hand. But the cards weren't cooperating. For the next hour, I was dealt a steady stream of marginal holdings. Weak aces, small pocket pairs, suited connectors that missed every flop. When I did play a hand, I ran into resistance from Tom or the new aggressive player, forcing me to fold and surrender small pots consistently. By 2 a.m., my $500 reload had dwindled to about $300. Not catastrophic losses, but steady bleeding that was heading in the wrong direction. The casino had gotten quieter, with fewer casual players and more serious grinders settling in for long sessions. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. How'd it end up? You go to bed, Rich. I looked at my diminished stack and felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Mike was expecting good news. Sarah was expecting me to call tomorrow with solutions to our problems. My mother was expecting help with her medical bills. Instead of responding to Mike, I focused on the next hand. Pocket jacks in middle position, a strong starting hand that should be played aggressively in most situations. When the action folded to me, I raised to $25, hoping to isolate one opponent and play a smaller pot. Tom called from the button, and we went to the flop heads up. Jack 7-4 with 2 spades gave me top set. But the flush draw meant I needed to build the pot quickly while protecting against draws. Bet 50, I said. About 2/3 of the pot. Tom called without much hesitation, suggesting he had something. Maybe a flush draw, maybe a weaker jack, maybe a pocket pair hoping to improve. The turn was the ace of spades, completing the flush draw and potentially giving Tom a stronger hand if he had ace-jack or pocket aces. But it was also possible he'd been drawing to the flush and had just gotten there. I checked, planning to call a reasonable bet or fold to a large one. Tom bet $75 into the $150 pot, exactly the size that put maximum pressure on my decision that if he had the flush, I was drawing to one out to make a full house. If he was bluffing or had a weaker hand, I was way ahead. The pot odds weren't quite there to call with a set. But losing this pot would leave me with less than $200 and very few options that I called. The river was the four of hearts, pairing the board and giving me a full house, jacks full of fours. Tom checked, and I bet $100, hoping he'd made two pair or a straight and would pay me off that he folded immediately. Nice hand, he said, pushing his cards toward Kevin. I'd won back about 250, bringing my stack to roughly 450. Still down overall, but moving in the right direction. The hand had taken almost 10 minutes to play, and I realized I'd been holding my breath through most of it. Kevin dealt the next hand, and I checked my phone to see the time. 2:27 a.m. I'd been playing for over 6 hours and was still stuck several $100s. The smart play was probably to quit while I still had most of my reload money intact. But quitting meant driving home with significant losses to explain. It meant facing Sarah's questions about the house and my mother's concerns about her medical bills without any solutions to offer. The new aggressive player raised to $30 from early position. I looked down at ace-queen suited, a strong hand that played well against a wide raising range. Make it 90, I said, three-betting to a size that would define his hand strength. He called. And we went to a flop that would determine whether I'd start winning my way back to even or continue the slow slide toward losing my entire reload. The flop came queen 10-6 with two hearts. Top pair, decent kicker, but a coordinated board that could have hit his calling range hard. By 4 a.m. I had been playing poker for over 8 hours and was down to my last $80. The $500 from my Visa had evaporated through a series of small losses, bad timing, and one catastrophic bluff against Tom that had cost me $200 when he called with middle pair. The casino felt different at this hour, quieter, with a more serious atmosphere. The casual players had long since gone home, leaving behind the grinders, the insomniacs, and people like me who had nowhere else to go until they'd either won back their losses or lost everything trying. Kevin's shift had ended around 3:30, replaced by Linda, who'd returned for what appeared to be a double shift. She recognized me from earlier and nodded politely as she settled into the dealer's chair. But I caught something in her expression, not judgment, exactly, but a kind of professional concern. "How's everyone doing?" she asked, beginning her familiar shuffle routine. "Hanging in there," Tom replied. He'd been steadily accumulating chips throughout the night and was now sitting behind what looked like $1,500. My money. Mostly I was facing a decision I'd been avoiding for the past hour. Quit with $80 and accept a $600 loss, or take another cash advance and try to win back what I'd lost. $600 was a lot of money, almost half the mortgage payment, but it wasn't devastating. I could absorb it, learn from the experience, and never make these mistakes again. But $1,500 was everything. Rent money, utility money, the cash I'd been saving for my mother's medical bills. If I could get back to even, none of tonight would matter. It would just be a story about a long night at the casino where I'd learned some expensive lessons, but ultimately come out whole. My phone showed 3 missed calls from work. It was now past 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and I was supposed to handle a property inspection at 8 a.m. In 4 hours. I'd have to call in sick, which would not go over well with Jim Martinez after missing yesterday's appointment. Linda dealt me king-queen offsuit in the big blind. When the action folded to the small blind, who completed, I checked and saw a flop of king-jack-7 with 2 clubs. Top pair, decent kicker, but I only had $80 left to play with. The small blind bet $20 into the $40 pot. I had $60 left. If I raised all in, I'd be committed to the hand regardless of what happened on the turn and river. If I called and checked the turn, I'd be giving him a free card to outdraw me. All in, I said, pushing my remaining chips forward. He called immediately and flipped over king 10. We had the same pair, but his 10 kicker beat my queen. Unless I caught a queen on the turn or river, my night was over. The turn was a 5. The river was a 9. King 10 held up, and my last $80 moved across the table. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty felt where my chips had been. 8.5 hours of play, $700 lost. And nothing to show for it except the beginnings of a headache and the metallic taste that comes from too much adrenaline and not enough food. Linda began shuffling for the next hand. Her movements automatic and efficient. Tom stacked his newly won chips with the same methodical precision he'd shown all night. The other players avoided making eye contact with me. giving me space to process what had happened. I stood up and walked back to the ATM, muscle memory guiding me through the casino floor. The blue glow of the machine felt familiar now, almost comforting. Like an old friend who never asked questions, never judged, just provided what I needed when I needed it. MasterCard this time. Another $500 in cash advances, bringing my total borrowed money to $1,000. Money I'd have to pay back with interest, but money that could also win back the $700 I'd already lost, and maybe more. The ATM dispensed the bills with mechanical indifference. I counted them twice, then walked back toward table 6, where Linda was dealing cards to the same players who'd been taking my money all night. But as I approached the table, I caught Linda's eye, and this time her expression was unmistakable. Not concern anymore, but something like sadness. The look of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. I bought in for another $500. Anyway, Linda dealt me into the next hand with the same professional efficiency she'd maintained all night. But I noticed her glances toward the floor supervisor had become more frequent. The way casino employees communicate without words when they're watching someone spiral in real time. The $500 from MasterCard felt different than the Visa money had. More desperate somehow, like each $50 bill carried a visible timestamp counting down to financial catastrophe. But it also represented possibility, enough ammunition to fight back, to prove that my earlier losses were just variants, not fundamental flaws in my approach. Tom had been watching my quick turnaround from bust out to reload with the kind of neutral attention that good players develop. Not sympathetic, not predatory, just observant. He understood that I was now playing with money I probably couldn't afford to lose, which changed the dynamics of every pot we'd play together. Long night, he said as Linda finished shuffling. Not really a question. Getting longer, I replied, trying to match his casual tone while my internal calculator ran scenarios about interest rates and minimum payments. The first few hands back were garbage: 7-2, 9-4, Jack-3 unsuited. I folded each one quickly, burning through the blinds and small bets while waiting for something playable. By 4:30 a.m., my fresh stack had dwindled to about 420 without seeing a flop. My phone buzzed again. Mike, probably wondering why I'd gone silent after bragging about my early wins. I let it go to voicemail. The story of this night had become too complicated to explain in a text message, too embarrassing to share with someone who'd been cheering for my success. When I finally got a decent hand, pocket eights in middle position, I raised to $25, hoping to play a small pot and build my stack gradually. The loose, aggressive player from earlier called, and Tom called from the button, creating a three-way pot with decent sizing. The flop came ace-king-8, giving me bottom set. Strong hand, but the board was coordinated enough that I needed to extract value quickly. I bet $60 into the $80 pot, hoping one of them had caught a piece and would pay me off. The aggressive player folded, but Tom called without much hesitation. Either he had something strong like two-pair or a straight draw, or he was floating with a weaker ace, planning to bluff later streets if I showed weakness. The turn was the queen of hearts, putting a 4 straight on the board, ace-king-queen-8. Anyone with a jack now had me beat, and there were several 2-card combinations in Tom's calling range that could include a jack. I checked, planning to call a reasonable bet or fold to significant pressure. Tom bet $90 into the $200 pot, a size that suggested he wanted me to call with weaker hands. The pot was offering me about 3-1 odds, but I needed to be right more than 25% of the time for the call to be profitable. Against Tom's betting range on this board, my set was probably good often enough to justify calling, but barely. I called. The river was the 10 of diamonds, completing the Broadway straight for anyone holding a jack. Tom checked quickly, which either meant he was giving up on a bluff or he'd made the straight and was trying to induce a bet from me. I checked behind, and he flipped over ace-jack offsuit for the nut straight. My set of eights was worthless, and another $200 pot moved across the table. I was down to about $200 again, having lost most of my MasterCard advance in less than an hour. The pattern was becoming clear: get a decent hand, build a pot, run into someone with something better, rinse and repeat until the money was gone. Linda dealt the next hand while I calculated my remaining options. 200 in chips, maybe 800 left in combined credit limits across my 3 cards, and a growing certainty that I was playing in a game where the other players had significant skill advantages. but I'd also lost over $1,000 in cash advances. Money that would start accruing interest immediately and compound until I paid it back. Walking away now meant accepting those losses as permanent, plus the interest charges that would follow. The alternative was taking another advance and trying to win back enough to minimize the damage. Not back to even necessarily, but close enough that the losses wouldn't be catastrophic. My phone showed 5:17 a.m. In less than 3 hours, I was supposed to be conducting a property inspection for the insurance company. My supervisor had already called 3 times, probably wondering why I'd missed yesterday's appointment, and wasn't answering my phone now. I looked at my remaining stack and tried to imagine explaining tonight's losses to Sarah. How I'd driven to a casino with rent money and come home with credit card debt instead. How the man she'd married had risked everything we had left on the belief that he could beat professional gamblers at their own game. The next hand, Linda dealt me ace-king suited. The same hand that had started my downward spiral hours earlier, when I'd misread the board and lost $400 to pocket aces. This time, I knew exactly what I was holding. Sunrise came through the casino windows like an accusation. I'd been playing for over 10 hours, the longest poker session of my life, and was down to my last $120 from the MasterCard advance. The mathematical reality was becoming impossible to ignore. I'd lost nearly $1,200 in cash advances, plus my original $300 by Dash, and my phone showed 17 missed calls. Work, my mother asking about picking up her heart medication. Sarah's sister wondering where I was. And 3 calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably the mortgage company's automated system reminding me about Monday's payment deadline. Linda had been dealing for almost 2 hours of her double shift, and I'd caught her exchanging meaningful glances with the floor's supervisor twice. The kind of looks casino employees share when they're watching someone destroy themselves in real time but can't legally intervene. "You okay, honey?" she asked during a brief pause while Tom organized his chips. The question sounded casual, but her tone carried the weight of experience. Someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out hundreds of times. "Just a long night," I replied, trying to sound like someone who still had control over the situation. Tom had been steadily accumulating chips throughout the night and was now sitting behind what looked like $2,000. Most of it had come from me, through a combination of bad beats, poor timing, and increasingly desperate decision-making as my stack dwindled. The morning shift was beginning to arrive, fresh players with full night's sleep and proper bankroll management, replacing the grinders who'd been playing since midnight. I was now clearly the weakest player at the table, playing short-stacked and emotionally compromised against opponents who had every advantage. My phone rang. Mom's number. I had to answer this one. "Dave, I'm sorry to call so early, but I need to pick up my heart medication today, and the pharmacy said the copay is $140. Can you help with that?" I stared at my remaining chips. $120. Less than the copay for the medication that was keeping my mother's heart functioning properly after her stroke. "Of course, Mom. I'll figure it out." "Are you sure? You sound tired." "I'm fine. Just working late. I'll call you later today, okay? Drive safe, David. I love you." I hung up and immediately went all in with pocket fives, hoping to double up and have enough money to at least cover my mother's prescription. Tom called with ace-queen, flopped an ace, and my last $120 joined the rest of my night's losses in his ever-growing stack. I sat there staring at the empty felt, finally accepting that I was completely broke. No chips, no cash, and credit cards that were either maxed out or close to it. The plan to win enough money to solve my problems had become the problem. Linda finished dealing the hand and began shuffling for the next one. The rhythm of the cards was hypnotic. Constant motion, endless possibility, the promise that the next hand could change everything. But I no longer had money to see the next hand. I walked back to the ATM one more time, knowing what I'd find but needing to confirm it. Visa declined. MasterCard declined. Discover over limit, but I tried anyway. Declined. Standing at the machine in my rumpled clothes from yesterday, I calculated the total damage. Original $300 plus $500 from Visa plus $500 from MasterCard. $1,300 lost in 10 hours. More than rent. More than my mother's medical bills. More than I could afford to lose even if everything else in my life had been going perfectly. But everything else wasn't going perfectly. Sarah was talking to lawyers about the house. My job was hanging by a thread after missing appointments. My mother needed medication. I could no longer afford to help her by dot. I walked back toward the poker room. But instead of sitting down, I stood behind the rail watching Linda deal cards to players who still had money to play with. Tom organized his chips with the same methodical precision he'd shown all night, my losses now representing a significant win for his session. The floor supervisor approached me. "Everything okay, sir?" "Yeah, just watching for a minute. Tables are for players only, I'm afraid. But there's a coffee shop on the other side of the casino if you'd like to take a break." I understood. They needed the seat for someone who could afford to play. Someone who hadn't just donated $1,300 to the poker room's economy over the course of one disastrous night. That I took one last look at Linda, who was dealing the next hand with the same professional efficiency she'd maintained since I'd first sat down. She glanced up and gave me a small nod, not sympathetic, exactly, but acknowledging. The kind of look that said she'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. That I walked out of the poker room, past the slot machines and table games, toward the parking garage where my Honda Civic was waiting for the drive home. The drive where I'd have 2 hours to figure out how to explain to everyone who was counting on me that I'd bet their futures on my ability to read strangers' faces across a felt table and lost. The phone call to my supervisor came at 7:30 a.m. from the parking garage, with the Honda's engine running and the heat struggling against February's bite. I'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, trying to construct an explanation that wouldn't get me fired immediately. "Jim, it's Dave Brennan. I'm really sorry, but I'm sick and won't be able to handle the Hartford inspection this morning." "Dave, what the hell? You missed yesterday's appointment, didn't return my calls, and now you're calling in sick on a Saturday? We've got a backlog of claims and I need bodies in the field." My voice sounded hollow even to myself. "I know. I'm really sorry. Food poisoning or something. I can reschedule for Monday." "Monday better happen, or we're going to have a serious conversation about your future here." "This isn't like you, Dave." He was right. The old Dave, the Dave from 3 months ago, would have shown up early, completed the inspection professionally, and filed his report by end of business. The Dave sitting in a casino parking garage at 7:30 a.m. had priorities that no longer aligned with keeping his job. The drive home took 2 hours through morning traffic, giving me plenty of time to calculate and recalculate the damage. $1,300 in cash advances across 3 credit cards, all of which would start accruing interest immediately. The Visa and MasterCard were now essentially maxed out, with only a few $100s of available credit remaining on the Discover, but the money was just the beginning. I'd missed 2 work appointments in 2 days, putting my job in serious jeopardy. I had no way to help my mother with her prescription copay. The mortgage payment was due Monday, and I no longer had the funds to cover IT at him. My phone rang as I passed the Groton exit. Sarah's number. "Dave, I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about the house." I almost told her everything right then. The poker losses, the maxed credit cards, the job situation. But something held me back. Maybe pride. Maybe hope that I could still fix things before she found out how bad they'd gotten. "I know. Can we talk later today? I'm dealing with some work stuff. My lawyer says if we're going to try mediation instead of just filing, we need to start the process soon. But that depends on whether you think we can actually work things out." "Do you want to work things out?" Long pause. "I don't know anymore, Dave. I want to, if that makes sense. But I need to see some sign that you're taking this seriously." After I hung up, I drove the rest of the way home in silence, trying to figure out what taking this seriously looked like when you're just gambling away more than a month's salary in a single night. The house felt different when I walked in at 10 a.m. Not just empty. Sarah had been gone for 3 weeks, but somehow smaller. Like the walls had moved closer together while I was gone. The bills were still scattered across the kitchen table where I'd left them Thursday evening. But now they represented problems I had no way to solve. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the table, spreading out the credit card statements to see exactly how much available credit remained. Visa, $47. MasterCard, $83. Discover, $340. But that was already over the limit from last night's cash advance. Total available credit, less than $500. Not enough for the mortgage payment. Not enough to help my mother. Not enough to buy groceries for more than a week or two. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Bro, you never told me how it ended up last night. Please tell me you crushed them." I stared at the message for 5 minutes before responding. "Long story. I'll call you later." But I wouldn't call him later. How do you tell your friend that his encouragement about your poker skills had contributed to the worst financial decision of your life? That the guy he'd been cheering for had turned into the kind of person who gambles away rent money while his mother needs help buying heart medication? I took a shower and tried to nap, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda dealing cards with mechanical precision. Tom stacking chips that used to be mine. The ATM screen flashing transaction declined. When I tried to get more money to chase my losses that BY afternoon, I'd made a decision. I Googled personal loans Connecticut and started filling out applications. Maybe I could borrow enough to cover the immediate bills and give myself time to figure out a longer-term solution. The interest rates were brutal, 18% to 24% annually, but that was still better than the cash advance rates on my credit cards. Application after application came back the same way. Declined due to high credit utilization and recent inquiries. The credit bureaus had already noticed my overnight transformation from someone who paid bills on time to someone who was maxing out credit cards and applying for loans at 4 p.m. I drove to my mother's apartment to tell her I couldn't help with the prescription copay. The conversation was worse than losing any pot at the casino. "Don't worry about it," she said, counting out $20 bills from her purse. "I can cover it this month." "But David, you look terrible. Are you sure everything's okay?" She handed me $200 from her Social Security check, money she needed for groceries and utilities to help pay bills that I'd gambled away 12 hours earlier. The shame was worse than any feeling I'd experienced at the poker table. That night, I sat in my empty house Googling Gamblers Anonymous Meetings Connecticut and found a schedule that included sessions at Mohegan Sun itself, Tuesday and Saturday afternoons, in a conference room on the second floor of the same building where I'd just lost everything. The irony felt appropriate somehow. Tuesday afternoon, I sat in my Honda Civic in the Mohegan Sun parking garage, staring at the same casino entrance I'd walked through 5 days earlier with $300 and a plan to solve all my problems. Now I was here for a different kind of solution. Carrying my mother's $200 and the weight of knowing I'd risked money I couldn't afford to lose. The elevator to the second floor felt like traveling to a different world, even though I was in the same building where I'd lost $1,300. Conference room B was marked with a small sign, "Private meeting, 2 p.m." No mention of Gamblers Anonymous, just the discreet privacy that people in recovery need. 12 people sat in a circle of folding chairs. Construction workers still in work clothes, retirees, a woman in scrubs who looked like she'd come straight from a hospital shift. Ages ranging from 20s to 70s, united by the common thread of having lost more than they could afford to games of chance. "Welcome," said a man in his 60s who appeared to be running the meeting. "We're glad you're here. Would you like to introduce yourself?" The words came out before I'd fully decided to say them. "I'm Dave, and I think I have a gambling problem." It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and the admission felt both terrifying and relieving, like finally naming something that had been growing in the shadows of my life for months. "Hi, Dave," the group responded in unison. The same ritual I'd seen in movies, but never experienced personally. I told them about Thursday night. The overdue bills that had driven me to the casino, the early wins that had made me believe I had special skills, the systematic losses that had consumed my rent money and maxed out my credit cards. I described the moment I'd realized I was playing with my mother's prescription money, the drive home through sunrise, the conversation where she'd given me cash from her Social Security check. The group listened without judgment, several people nodding in recognition of patterns they'd lived through themselves. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment before the meeting leader spoke. "Thank you for sharing, Dave. What you described, the progression from small wins to larger losses. The belief that you could control the outcome through skill. The escalation when you started chasing losses. That's the story most of us could tell about our bottom. The details change, but the pattern is remarkably consistent." Other people shared their stories. A woman who'd lost her daughter's college fund playing online poker. A man who'd embezzled from his employer to fund sports betting. A retiree who'd blown through his entire pension at the slot machines over the course of 2 years. Each story was different, but the underlying theme was the same. Normal people who'd convinced themselves they could beat games that were mathematically designed to take their money, and who'd kept playing long after the evidence proved otherwise. After the formal meeting ended, people lingered to talk informally. The woman in scrubs approached me with a knowing look. First meeting. Yeah. How could you tell? You still think this might be temporary? That maybe you can learn to gamble responsibly or just stick to smaller amounts. Most of us tried that for years before accepting that abstinence is the only solution that works. She introduced herself as Linda, a different Linda than the dealer from Thursday night. But the name made me think about the professional efficiency with which that Linda had dealt cards while watching me destroy myself in real time. I've been in recovery for 8 years. This Linda continued. I work at the hospital now, but I used to deal blackjack at Foxwoods. Spent 15 years watching people lose money they couldn't afford to lose, then went home and did the same thing online. The industry teaches you exactly how addiction works, but knowing and avoiding are two different things. We talked for 20 minutes about the meeting, about recovery, about the long process of rebuilding trust with family members who'd watched gambling consume progressively more of your life. She mentioned sponsorship and gave me her phone number, explaining that recovery happened one day at a time, but was easier with support from people who understood the struggle. The hardest part, she said, is learning to live without the action. Everything else feels slow and boring compared to the intensity of having significant money at risk. But that intensity is exactly what makes it impossible to think clearly about risk and reward. As I drove home, I thought about what she'd said about living without the action. Thursday night had been the most intense experience I'd had in months. Pure focus, high stakes, constant decision-making with immediate consequences. Even losing had been more engaging than my regular life of processing insurance claims and worrying about bills, but the cost of that intensity was sitting in my kitchen in the form of credit card statements and overdue notices. $1,300 that I'd have to pay back with interest, plus the job I might lose, plus the marriage that was hanging by a thread, plus the trust I'd broken with my mother by accepting money she needed for groceries that I had Linda's number in my phone now, and a meeting schedule that included sessions twice a week. 47 days without gambling, she'd said, was her current streak. Not because she'd stopped wanting to gamble, but because she'd learned that the wanting would pass if she could just wait it out. 47 days seemed impossible. But maybe one day seemed manageable. Maybe tomorrow I could make it one day. My mother called at 8:30 a.m. Wednesday morning while I was staring at my laptop screen, trying to find entry-level jobs that didn't require references from my current supervisor. The sound of her ringtone made my stomach clench. She only called this early when something was wrong. David, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to pick up my heart medication today. The pharmacy said the copay is $140. I know you're dealing with your own things, but I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle deeper into my chest. Of course, Mom. I'll handle it. But I couldn't handle it. The $200 she'd given me Sunday was gone, spent on groceries and gas, leaving me with maybe $30 in my checking account. My credit cards were maxed from Thursday night's disaster, and I'd already borrowed against next week's paycheck just to keep the lights on. Actually, I said, my voice catching slightly, can you call them about a payment plan? I'm having some cash flow issues this week. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. David, what's going on? You've sounded strange since the weekend. I should have told her then. Should have explained how I'd lost $1,300 playing poker while she was rationing her heart medication. Should have admitted that the responsible son she'd raised had gambled away money she needed to stay healthy. Instead, I said, just some temporary work stuff. I'll figure it out. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and calculated exactly how much I owed. Credit card minimums, $340 per month. Mortgage, $1,847. Utilities, $267 past due. Car payment, $298. My mother's medication, $140. Total monthly obligations, $2, $892. My take-home pay after taxes, $2, $400. Even if I kept my job, which wasn't guaranteed after missing appointments, I was now $500 short each month. The poker losses hadn't just cost me $1,300. They'd pushed me past the mathematical breaking point where income could cover expenses. I opened a new browser tab and searched for debt. Consolidation loans, bad credit. The interest rates were brutal, 24% to 36% annually, but maybe I could buy myself time to figure out a longer-term solution. Application after application came back declined. My credit score had apparently dropped 50 points in the past week, triggered by the maxed cards and missed payments that were already starting to appear on my credit report. My phone rang. Jim Martinez from work. Dave, I need you to come in today. We've got 3 claims that need immediate attention, and I can't have you calling in sick every time there's work to do. I'll be there in an hour. At least I still had a job. For now. But as I got dressed, I kept thinking about my mother counting out $20 bills from her Social Security check to help me with bills I'd gambled away. The image wouldn't leave my head, her careful hands sorting through money she needed for groceries, giving it to a son who'd just lost more than she received in an entire month. The shame was becoming harder to carry than the debt. Friday evening. I sat in the parking lot outside CVS Pharmacy with my mother's prescription slip and no way to pay for it. She'd called that morning to say the pharmacy had agreed to hold her medication until weekend, but they needed payment by Monday or they'd have to put it back in inventory. $140. Less than I'd lost on any single hand Thursday night. But now it might as well have been $14,000. I'd spent the week processing insurance claims with mechanical efficiency while running calculations in my head. If I sold my laptop, maybe $60. If I returned the winter coat Sarah had bought me for Christmas, maybe $80. If I donated plasma twice a week, maybe $40 weekly. None of it added up to enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Can we talk Sunday? I want to discuss mediation before making any final decisions. Mediation. A last chance to save our marriage, assuming I could convince her I was taking our problems seriously. But how do you rebuild trust when you've just made those problems infinitely worse through secret gambling losses? I walked into CVS and approached the pharmacy counter. The technician, a tired-looking woman about my age, pulled up my mother's prescription on her computer. Margaret Brennan, heart medication. That'll be $140. Is there a generic version? Something cheaper. She checked her screen. This is already the generic. The brand name would be over $300. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the small orange bottle that contained my mother's ability to stay alive, knowing I'd gambled away the money to pay for it multiple times over in a single night. Can I put this on a payment plan? We don't do payment plans for prescriptions, but you could try calling the manufacturer. Sometimes they have assistance programs for people having financial difficulties. Financial difficulties. The euphemism for what happened when responsible adults made catastrophically irresponsible decisions. I drove to my mother's apartment that evening to tell her about the delay. She was making dinner, tuna casserole, the same recipe she'd been making since I was 10, and offered to set an extra place. I can't stay long. But Mom, about your prescription, did something happen at the pharmacy? Not exactly. I'm just having some cash flow issues this week. Maybe by Wednesday I can. She turned off the stove and sat across from me at her small dining table, the one she'd inherited from her mother decades ago. David, I've been watching you for weeks now. You look exhausted, you're losing weight, and you keep saying everything's fine when it obviously isn't. What's really going on? I almost told her everything. The poker losses, the maxed credit cards, the job hanging by a thread. The way I'd convinced myself that gambling was a solution to our problems instead of another problem that would make everything worse. Instead, I said, Sarah and I are having money troubles. The separation is expensive, and I'm trying to keep up with 2 households. She nodded sympathetically, then reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook. How much do you need? Mom, no. You already gave me $200 last weekend, and I can give you more if you need it. That's what family does. She wrote a check for $300, money she couldn't afford, taken from a fixed income that was already stretched to cover her own medications and living expenses. This should cover the prescription and give you a little breathing room. I stared at the check, feeling the weight of accepting money from someone whose medication I couldn't afford to buy because I'd gambled away. $1,300 trying to solve problems that gambling had only made worse, but I took it anyway because I needed it, and because the alternative was letting her heart medication sit at the pharmacy while I figured out how to explain that her son had become the kind of person who risked other people's money on poker hands. That night, I sat in my kitchen holding her check and Linda's phone number from the GA meeting, trying to decide which path led toward becoming someone who deserved the trust of people who loved him. I woke up Saturday morning to the sound of someone pounding on my front door. Heavy, official knocking that could only mean bad news. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a suit holding a clipboard, process server, probably, though I couldn't imagine what legal documents were already catching up with me. David Brennan. Yeah. Foreclosure notice from Connecticut Savings Bank. You're officially 60 days behind on your mortgage payments. The envelope was thick, full of legal language about default procedures and redemption periods. But the essential message was simple. Pay $4,200 within 30 days or lose the house. $4,200. 3 times what I'd lost at the poker table, but the gambling had started the cascade that led here. Missing work appointments, max credit cards, inability to make even partial payments while I tried to dig out of the hole I'd created. I called Sarah from my kitchen, sitting at the same table where I'd made the decision to drive to Mohegan Sun 2 weeks ago. Sarah, we need to talk sooner than Sunday. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. Silence. Then, what do you mean foreclosure? I thought you were keeping up with the payments. I was, but things got complicated after you left. Can you come over today? She arrived an hour later, looking like someone who'd been preparing for bad news, but hoping it wouldn't be this bad. I made coffee, a small gesture toward normalcy, while she read through the foreclosure documents. Dave, this says you haven't made a payment since January. It's almost March. I know. Where did the money go? You make enough to cover the mortgage, even without my income. This was the moment. Tell her about the poker losses, the maxed credit cards, the $1,300 I'd gambled away trying to solve problems I'd only made worse. Or construct another explanation that might preserve what was left of her trust in me. Work's been slow. I had some unexpected expenses. I kept thinking I could catch up, but she set the papers down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something closer to resignation. Dave, I've been trying to save this marriage for months, but I need you to be honest with me about what's really happening. I am being honest. No, you're not. You're giving me explanations that don't add up, telling me everything's fine when you're about to lose the house. I can't work with someone who won't tell me the truth about our situation. We talked for another hour, but the conversation kept circling back to the same fundamental problem. She knew I was hiding something significant, and I wasn't ready to admit what I'd done after she left. I sat alone with the foreclosure notice and Linda's phone number from the GA meeting. $4,200 to save the house. More money than I'd ever had at one time. More than I could borrow or earn in the next 30 days. But I kept thinking about Thursday night at the poker table, when I'd been up almost $400 before the losses started. If I could get back to that point, if I could just play disciplined, poker for a few hours and run a little better, maybe I could win enough to at least make a partial payment and buy more time. The thought terrified me because it felt so reasonable, so logical, so much like the thinking that had gotten me into this situation in the first place that I looked up the poker room hours at Mohegan Saturday night action would be good. Loose players. Bigger pots. Exactly the kind of game where a skilled player could make significant money if he caught cards and played correctly. Then I looked at Linda's phone number and remembered her saying that recovery meant learning to live without the action, that the wanting would pass if you could just wait it out. But the foreclosure notice had a 30-day deadline, and waiting wouldn't solve anything. I spent the rest of the day going back and forth between those two choices. Drive to the casino with my mother's $300 check and try to turn it into enough money to save the house. Or call Linda and admit that 2 weeks after my first GA meeting, I was already planning my next gambling session at BY evening. I'd made my decision that I didn't go to the casino Saturday night. Instead, I called Linda from the GA meeting and told her I was thinking about gambling again. We talked for 40 minutes about triggers and rationalizations, about how the brain convinces itself that this time will be different even when all the evidence suggests otherwise. The foreclosure notice isn't a poker problem, she said. It's a consequence of the poker problem you already have. More gambling won't solve it. It'll just create new problems on top of the existing ones. Sunday morning, Sarah came back for our planned conversation about mediation. This time, I told her everything. The Thursday night poker session, the $1,300 in losses, the max credit cards, my mother's prescription money, the whole cascade of financial damage that had led to the foreclosure notice. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to disappointment to something that looked like grief. Dave, why didn't you tell me this when I asked yesterday? Because I was ashamed. Because I thought maybe I could fix it before you found out how bad it was. Fix it how? More gambling. The question hung in the air between us. Because yes, that had been exactly what I was thinking Saturday night when I'd looked up the poker room hours and calculated how much I could afford to risk with my mother's money. I don't know. I thought if I could get back to even, none of this would matter. Sarah sat quietly for several minutes, processing what I'd told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but definitive. I can't do this anymore. Dave, I've been trying to save our marriage. But I can't save it by myself while you're actively destroying it. What does that mean? It means I'm filing for divorce. And it means I can't help you with the house payments, even if I wanted to. I need to protect what's left of my own credit and savings. We spent another hour discussing logistics. She'd move her remaining belongings out over the next week. I could keep the house if I could figure out how to save it, but she wouldn't be financially responsible for it anymore. The joint credit card accounts would be closed, and we'd split responsibility for the existing balances. After she left, I sat in our living room, my living room now, surrounded by the furniture we'd chosen together and the pictures we'd taken during better times. The house felt enormous and empty, like a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. Monday morning, I called the mortgage company to discuss options. The customer service representative was polite but clear. They needed $4,200 to stop the foreclosure proceedings. Or I could surrender the property voluntarily to avoid the credit impact of a completed foreclosure. What about a payment plan? You'd need to bring the account current first. Then we could discuss modifying the payment terms going forward. $4,200 upfront. No exceptions, no flexibility, no consideration for the circumstances that had led to the default. I spent the rest of the week applying for personal loans, calling family members I hadn't spoken to in years, and researching bankruptcy procedures. Every option led to the same conclusion. I'd created a financial hole too deep to climb out of with my current income and credit situation. 2 weeks after the poker game that wrecked my life, I went to my second GA meeting. I admitted to foreclosure, divorce proceedings, and the urge to gamble it all back. The leader called it chasing losses, the most dangerous stage. Afterward, Linda reminded me recovery meant patience, not quick fixes. Driving home, I thought maybe recovery started with small promises, like making sure my mother had her heart medication. The weekend brought dead ends with lawyers and credit counselors. On Monday, I got divorce papers. By Tuesday, I was on unpaid leave, insurance ticking down. That afternoon, I finally confessed everything to my mom. The debt, the foreclosure, the job loss. She offered her $8,000 savings. I cried, ashamed, but accepted, with her condition that I keep going to meetings that I use the money to catch up on the mortgage and buy time. Slowly, I rebuilt a lower-paying job, mediation with Sarah, GA meetings twice a week. At 6 months, I'd accepted that recovery wasn't about fixing everything, but about living differently. A year later, I was sponsoring newcomers. 18 months in, I carried a casino chip from the night I'd lost it all. Now just a reminder of a life I'd left behind.